Thanks, Andrew, and good morning, and thank you for joining this webinar. As Andrew said, we're going to focus on giving you a brief overview of the IB reports that we've developed for the value-added service. This is a sort of start of a sort of pilot service, really, for doing value-added analyses for IB schools, schools doing the IB diploma, and extends the work we've been doing with international schools and GCSEs. So over the next half an hour, we'll take you through how we calculate value-added performance for the IB diploma. We'll have a look at some of the reports, and we'll make sure that you're clear on how you can upload your IB results to take part in the service. And at the end, we'll have a look at some of the emerging trends for schools using the service. Just to start, why is value added so important? Well, value added looks at the results for students and compares them to students that have similar starting points. So it's a fairer measure. We're looking at students that have the same starting point and then seeing how their outcomes in the IB diploma compare. And for the starting point for this service, we're using CAT4 scores. And we can then look at how much progress each student makes over the course of their IB diploma. Value added allows us to sort of quantify how much impact a school is having on students' learning, and it's a fairer measure because it takes into account the starting point of each student. So when we're looking at school effectiveness, it provides a very useful additional way of evaluating and measuring performance for schools alongside attainment. In terms of how we actually do the value-added calculations, you can see here on this chart that we'll be using CAT scores from students sort of around about year 9, 10, 11. So it's a CAT score either before or at the start of the IB diploma. We can use that CAT score to estimate where we think students will get to in their IB diploma. We can do that at a subject level, at a subject grouping level, or for the overall diploma score as well. And some students will, based on their estimate, achieve results that are in line with that estimate. But there'll be other students that achieve higher results, so we can say they have a positive value-added score. There'll be some students that starting at the same point that achieve a result that's lower than their estimate, and we would say they have a negative value-added score. If we look at how that actually works out in terms of numbers, the first thing to note is that we convert grades that students achieve in the various components of the diploma, so the standard level and high level, we convert those grades into points, and you can see the sort of point score conversion there. Obviously, we're allocating higher points for the higher level elements than we are for the standard level. This enables us to put all of the individual subjects together and provide a consistent analysis of value-added performance across both individual subjects and for the diploma as a whole. You can see on the right there just a simple example for a school with 3 students, each with slightly different starting points. So they've got different CAT scores. You can see that the students' CAT scores produce different estimates. So, for example, the first student has a CAT score of 105. Their estimated result is 150. They actually achieved a point score of 160 when we calculate their points using the points on the left there. And so we say they have a positive value added of plus 10. The second student started with a higher CAT score. We would expect them to have a higher estimated result. Their actual result, however, was slightly below their estimate, so we say they have a negative value-added score of minus 15. And the final student with the highest CAT score, the highest starting point, they have an estimate of 220. they achieved a CAT score of 200, IB score of 240. So again, they have positive value added. And we can simply take the average of those value added scores for all students to come up with a value added score for the school, which in this case is slightly positive. So let's have a look at some of the reports that we've produced for the IB diploma. The report sort of starts looking at overall school performance, so looking at performance in the diploma as a whole, and then the reports drill down to have a look at performance for different subject groups and also for individual subjects. To start with, we give you a summary of the students that are included in the analysis for each individual year. So in this case, for this school, they provided data for the academic year for 112 students taking the diploma, and we've been able to find matched CAT data for 110 of those students. So almost all of the students have both some CAT data and IB data. You can see the CAT data rather on the right-hand side. So interesting to see the sort of CAT scores for each of the components. You can see that on average the students in this school have an above average CAT score. A CAT score of 100 would be the average for an intake in the UK. So this cohort has above average attainment from their CAT score, although it's interesting to note the difference between the non-verbal and the verbal scores. There's quite a big difference there, where their non-verbal is well above average, their verbal score is actually slightly below average. We then look at the overall attainment for the IB diploma and value added. So we show the total IB points. So this is the IB points that you'll be familiar with, that is the raw IB points score for the diploma. So in this school, that cohort had an average IB points score of 30.8. We also provide the average grade for both the higher level and the standard level. So that's on average students are achieving around about a grade 5 in both higher and standard level. And then we also show the percentage of students achieving grades 4 and above across their grades in individual subjects, grade 5 and above, and grade 6 and above. On the right-hand side, we then show the average point score that's been calculated by FFT. So that's using that conversion that I referred to earlier, where we convert each grade into a point score for both higher and standard level subjects, and that comes up with an overall point score for all subjects. And in this case, the average score for the school is 162, and we can see that that's got a slightly positive value added score. That's 8 points higher than we expect. So the school's got a positive value added score. Their IB results are slightly higher than we would expect given the starting point of those students. We can then drill down into the same data, but looking at different pupil groups. So it's interesting to look at the performance of boys versus girls, to have a look at the performance of pupils that have started with higher or lower ability as determined by their CAT4 scores, and also look at the verbal ability groups there at the bottom, and those might give quite a different picture for a school if we just look at verbal ability alone compared to the ability groups based on CAT overall. And again, you can see the CAT scores for those different pupil groups. So for example, here we can see that boys, there are sort of roughly equal numbers of boys and girls in this school. The boys actually have a slightly higher starting point. They have a higher CAT score than girls, so 111 versus 105. But we can actually see that when it comes to the IB attainment, the girls are doing better than the boys. So, and therefore you can see in the value added over on the right hand, it's no surprise that actually the girls have a positive value added score. The boys are in line. They're just slightly below average, but it's the girls that are having a bigger impact on the value added score for this school. So this report is really useful to look for gaps in performance. We've identified a gap there for value-added performance for boys and girls. We can look at attainment gaps and see that girls are doing better at both high level and standard level, and then we can look at similar gaps across the different ability groups. For example, the students that have very high verbal ability are making the biggest value-added gains down at the bottom there, compared to students with slightly lower than average verbal ability. Those students had a negative value-added score. We also show performance that allows you to benchmark your performance to other schools. So here we've got an example of a chart that shows your attainment here and value added on the right hand side. And we're comparing your performance to the benchmark for the group of international schools that are participating in this value added service. So the dotted line is the benchmark, and that will help you compare and put your school's context in the context of other similar international schools. We then sort of move on to drilling down to looking at performance in different subjects, and we've done this at two levels. First of all, we look at the subject groups for the IB diploma, so we're aggregating individual subjects up to their relevant subject groups, and you can see the 6 subject groups there. We also then drill down to have a look at the individual subjects, but this first report looks at the 6 subject groups for the diploma. You can see you've got an analysis of results there for both the high level subjects and the standard level subjects within each subject group, and the data in the table is the same sort of format. It's showing you the number of students that are entered for subjects at a higher or standard level for each of the subject groups. You can see the average grade achieved in each of those areas, the various thresholds, the percentage of grades that were grade 4, 5 or 6 and above. And on the right hand side, again, you've got the point score that has been calculated by FFT using that mapping table. So we're converting the grades into a point score to get an attainment there and a value added score as well. So for example, we can see that students have a higher value added score in maths at higher level, 2.3 there, compared to standard level. Whereas perhaps in sciences, the value added score is very, very similar across both higher level and the standard level. So again, you're looking for strengths and areas for improvement, and the value added scores here for each of the subject groups at higher and standard will give you a useful analysis there alongside the attainment gaps as well. We provide that same information in a chart, so you can see it either as a table or as a chart, and for many people the visual analysis is very helpful to sort of see subjects with higher or lower attainment. So for example, in language acquisition, we can see that attainment is much higher at high level compared to standard level, and on the right hand side you've got the value added scores for each of those areas as well. It is worth noting that in all of these reports, if I just go back to that previous table, in all of these reports on the system you can filter these reports. So at the top here we've got gender as all, but if we were in the actual online system, you'll be able to click on that and say I want to see this table for either boys or for girls, and it's well worth doing that to look at any differences at a subject level for those different students. You could filter on level if you want to and just look at higher or standard level data separately. And for those schools that have submitted data for multiple years, you could have a look at your results for 2019, for 2018, and compare performance and value added scores for different years. So all of the reports in the system are interactive, and you can use those filters to look at different groups of pupils. The final level of reports that we provide to schools is drilling right down to having a look at the individual subjects. And clearly there are a large number of subjects. So for this particular report, you will need to choose a subject group. So this example, we've got the subject group for individual and societies. Within that, we are showing you the individual subjects that your school and students have been taking within both standard level and higher level. You can see how many students have taken each subject, and you can see an analysis of attainment. At this stage, the value-added performance, you'll notice, is not on this subject level table. As the service evolves, our plan is that we will be able to bring in value-added performance at the level for certainly some of the larger individual subjects. So you will have value-added performance for both the subject groups and be able to look at value-added performance for individual subjects. So at the moment, you can see that the value, the attainment is there for the individual subjects. And just as we looked at with the subject groups, for each of the individual subjects, you've also got that data shown on a chart as well as a table. You can then drill right down to have a look at individual pupils within the system. So you can see pupil data in a table format with overall performance for each student in the diploma, as well as results for subject groups and subjects. And we'll look at those tables in a minute. And you've also got scatterplots, and many teachers find the sort of visual analysis of a scatterplot very helpful. We've got two types of scatterplots here on this slide. On the left, you can see that we're plotting the expected result for each student, the expected score on the x-axis at the bottom, and we're showing the actual score for the students on the y-axis, the vertical axis. So students that are above the dotted line, above the 45-degree line, those are students that are achieving higher scores than we expected. They've got positive value added. The students below the 45-degree line, below the dotted line, those students have lower results than we expected and have a negative value added score. Again, these scatterplots work very well in the online system because you can hover over each of the dots and actually see who that student is. You can see their exact scores. So it's a very useful way of identifying, for example, on this scatterplot, who is the student at the very top that's achieved a score that's much higher than we expect. The scatterplot on the right is similar, but this time we're plotting their CAT score on the bottom. So students on the far right have higher CAT scores, students to the left have lower CAT scores, and on the vertical axis, the y-axis, we're plotting their value-added scores. So students above the dotted line have positive value-added scores. Their results are higher than expected, and students below have a lower value-added score. And scatterplots are very useful for spotting patterns within the underlying student data, for having a look at outliers. In this example, the blue dots are boys, the orange dots are girls, so you can have a look at the gender difference for groups of students as well. Here's an example of a scatterplot for subjects. So we're looking at a subject group now. Again, we're looking at individual and the societies, that subject group, and we're showing both the higher level and standard level results for students on the same scatterplot. So you get a sense of value-added performance for both the standard level, which are the purple dots, and the higher level, which are the green dots. And again, the same format here. Students below the dotted line have lower value-added scores. Students above the dotted line have a higher value-added score. So the last couple of reports, and as I said, as well as looking at a scatter plot, you can drill right down to have a look at individual students. So this table will have your student names on the left-hand side, And all of the data that we have used to analyze your school's attainment and value-added performance is shown here for each of your students. So you've got the CAT scores, you've got their IB points, you've got their average grade for higher and standard level, and you've got the average point score that FFT has calculated based on those individual grades, and you've got value added there. This table is very useful for sorting. So if you want to sort, for example, on value added, you would simply click on the sort for the column heading for value added, and you'll be able to see the students that have the highest down to lowest value added scores. Alternatively, you might want to sort on attainment or IB points, or even the CAT scores. So it's very useful for ranking and sorting your students. The other useful part of this table is you can export this data in a CSV or an Excel file. So if you go to the download button in the system when you're on this report, you'll be able to download this data if you want to use it for external analysis or to put that data into other systems. And there are similar tables, just to finish off here, for both the subject groups and for individual subjects here. So we've got the first table at the top is showing you attainment and value-added performance for each of the subject groups for each student, both higher and standard level. And then you can drill right down to the raw data, the underlying data that is used for this. So you've got for each student, each of the subjects they've taken at higher and standard level and their individual grades. So that's an overview of the IB reports that are in the service at the moment. And we've got here just a brief reminder of how you upload your results. At the moment, I know for the pilot schools, I think most schools are sending their results to IB directly. As the service develops, and it's worth sort of noting this, we will make that a more sort of automated process so that you will be able to upload your results to a secure website very simply, and that will mean that you can upload your results at any time. And that's a straightforward process. So we would expect as a service sort of develops over the coming year, we will upload via a website, and you can see the sort of process there. The other thing it's worth reminding is that you can send us data for both this current year, so 2019, but if you're interested in also having the analysis for previous years, we'll be happily accept your data from either 2017 or 2018, which will enable you to look at performance over time. The good news for the IB value-added service is that you simply have to send us your IB results file, so that there is no complicated transforming data or filling in spreadsheets. You simply need to send us your IB results file. That is the file that IB send to you each year with your results. FFT and GL will then be able to match that data to the CAT data that we already have for your students, and that is the data that is used to produce the reports that we've had a look at today. So just to finish, just a couple of trends really. So far we've got around about 20 schools that are using the service. So already there are some interesting trends for attainment that we can see, and we thought we would just sort of share that with you to finish here. So this is just a summary of the data that we've seen in your individual school reports, but now just showing you the aggregated data for all schools using the service. So to start with, you can see the first 5 rows are showing you the average CAT scores for students and schools using the service. Interestingly, unsurprisingly, the students that are doing IB tend to have higher than average attainment. They have higher than average CAT scores, and so 100 would be the average for all students. And for the students in the schools participating in this service, the average CAT score is 109. As I mentioned earlier, within that, though, you will see there's quite a big difference between the verbal score and the non-verbal score for students. So that verbal deficit of 6 points between verbal and non-verbal. And you can see there the average attainment for students, and this table is quite useful to see that broken down by gender. So as we pointed out earlier, in fact, the boys have higher CAT scores than the girls, so they're coming in with slightly higher prior attainment as measured by their CAT tests. But when we look at outcomes, that actually reverses, and the girls end up with slightly higher IB results than the boys. And you'll be interesting for you to compare the gender gaps in terms of performance in your school to the gender gap that we can see across all schools using this service. And finally here we drill down to look at it by subjects. So this again is a summary of all the students data that we've got for the group of schools participating in the service at the moment. So you can see the average attainment for higher and standard level for international schools based on this sample of schools and pupils for each of the subject groups for higher and standard. And again, there are some interesting trends there. For example, in maths, students achieve slightly higher grades in higher level compared to standard level. But if we look at individual and societies, that flips around, and actually students achieve slightly higher results on average in standard level compared to higher level. So again, it'd be interesting to look at attainment for your school when you look at the reports that we've looked at for individual schools and be able to compare it to the overall performance that we can see here. And then the last table, it just pulls out a selection of the larger subjects in terms of entries there for both standard level and higher level. Again, you can see the attainment for each subject at higher and standard level, the average grade for the schools and students participating in this service, and you'll be interesting for you to compare that attainment to the attainment that students are achieving in your school. So that's the end of this presentation. As I said at the start, this is a sort of new service that FFT and GL are working together on for international schools. We are interested in feedback, and I know Angie will see if there are any questions in a minute, but particularly for those that perhaps are using the recording in the future, if you do have any feedback on the IB reports, the service, please do contact us at the email address there. We're very interested in getting feedback at this stage so that feedback can inform the development of this IB value-added service for schools over the coming year. So I will now hand back to Andrew.